Good afternoon, everyone, and I guess good morning to those of you who are joining us from the West Coast. As is Ivy Experience tradition, we'll probably be starting the webinar around, 1:01, 1:02 p.m. Give everyone that chance to, get the alert from their computer that the webinar is starting, run over, try and, try to get everything booted up, discover that Zoom has decided that it needs to update right at that moment. In case you can't tell, I have feelings about Zoom. How are you doing today, Jordan?
I'm good. I'm good. Another beautiful day in Florida. How are you?
It actually is a beautiful day up in Philadelphia too, so you don't get to lord your beautiful weather over me today, at least. It's going to
Mhm.
be pouring tomorrow, so that's fine.
If it makes you feel better, it will be pouring here this afternoon and probably tomorrow as well. So I'll be right there with
Hmm. I'm also really excited to finally do a webinar exclusively about essays. Those of you who have attended some of our earlier webinars have always seen me joke that we have saved the best thing to last for last, and now we have a webinar that is entirely just about, I don't know, eating dessert first.
you. It is a treat to be able to talk about the things that we do day in and day out. So I'm excited to do that. Do you have any good plans this weekend? Up to anything?
So we actually had my in-laws down for a late Mother's Day, which was nice to see them. Went out, did a little shopping, and now I am here with all of our fine folks joining us. What about you?
Quiet weekend for the most part. Saw some friends yesterday. Took a very long walk today. And the thing I will lord over you is that I have a 20-minute walk from the beach. So I did go to see the ocean today, which was very nice. Um,
That okay, you have that. I do live in a landlocked state.
Listen, the beach at least is close to where you are
Mhm.
in Pennsylvania, so that's nice.
All right. So I think we are coming up on 101 here. So we will be getting started shortly. Go ahead and get our slideshow pulled up. That is not the right slide. Let's go ahead and try that again from the beginning, shall we? In case everyone was concerned that they briefly traveled forward in time. All right. So once again, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on the coast that you're on. My name is Alyssa Coltrane. I'm the Director of College Admissions for Ivy Experience. I have Jordan Holmes with me today, our Assistant Director of College Admissions and also a former admissions officer. So today, what we're going to be doing for the next hour or so is talking to you a little bit about the role that college essays, both the Common App personal statement and the supplement essays, play in the process of college admissions. We'll stick around and take questions at the end of the webinar for as long as you have questions for. Please feel free to drop those in the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll probably be taking all of those questions at the end. All right. So, Jordan, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, let's get started. So there are things that we like to talk about, being that there are 5 things that are within a student's control in the application process, and all of them are listed here. And they're all equally important, but we'll emphasize different things at different times. And the most of our presentation today will be focused on essays and applications. But to run through them quickly, grades and rigor are going to be probably the most important parts of a student's application that's in their control. Because ultimately, to be competitive at some of the top schools across the country and across the world, students have to have not only the grades and the performance in their areas, but also the level of rigor, challenging themselves within the coursework that's available to them, kind of gets you a ticket to the dance at some of those big schools. Same thing with standardized test scores, depending on testing policies, and there's a whole other webinar about that as well. But really, we're looking for students, or rather, the students can control their performance on standardized test scores. Same thing with extracurricular activities. Anything that a student does outside of this class time, outside of school, inside of school, whatever it might be, that's something that they can really dive into, figure out activities that make sense to them, things like that. While you can't necessarily control what's on a letter of recommendation, you can absolutely control who you ask. Prioritizing teachers that know you the best and like you the best should be something that a student can control as well. If they happen to also be a coach or a mentor or a club leader, that can be another great way to show a different aspect as to who the student is. But again, the most important thing on here is going to be the essays and application. That's really what's in the student's control and what we're going to be focusing on later today. That essay and application is a way that students can speak directly to the admission office. It's really the only time that they have to be able to tell their authentic stories. And authenticity is something that's really important here. And we emphasize that not only in this webinar, but also as we work with students as well, highlighting the things that are exciting to them, to creating that authentic voice as something that's really, really exciting and really, really authentic, and that admission officers, from my own experience included, enjoy when they read applications. However, essays cannot make up for, concerning grades or weaknesses in specific areas, but they can absolutely separate a student from the pack. A really strong essay that conveys who the student is can separate students that are already having the grades and the test scores and the great extracurriculars in that kind of large pool when students apply to those schools. When we talk about a timeline, this is specifically for high school juniors. So we're talking about, ideally, students will be starting with us in the fall/winter of their junior year. It is no longer the fall/winter, at least where I am in the world. So our students we're starting late. Maybe it's getting to that time where we want to start thinking about that in earnest and really starting to think about not all all of the essays that you'll have to be writing a little bit later on. We do an extensive brainstorming process, and we recommend that students do that throughout the winter as well. And then in the spring, post APs, we understand that APs and finals is a crazy time always, but we would love to have students starting their common application essay at that time, so they can roll into the summer when they have a little bit more time, when they're a little bit more available, and start drafting that essay and having to make revisions and having conversations with us or their mentors or whoever it might be to then have the final product at some point over the summer, ideally. Then by the fall of their 12th grade year, we would love to have them be fine-tuning their common application essay and then starting and finishing those supplemental essays, depending on the schools that they apply to. The summer goes by a lot more quickly than you think, so we always encourage students to get started sooner rather than later. We understand that APs are crazy, but at the same time, we would love to make sure that they have time to actually dive into those essays. And again, this process is all about balance. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. We want to make sure that students are finding balance between working on those essays, spending their time on it, but then also doing the things that you enjoy. High school isn't always a stepping stone to college. You should enjoy the experiences that you're having here, because it will also translate well in your applications elsewhere as well. Take full advantage of the summer. Know that you might be doing some things. We know that you might be going to trips or camps or things like that. But this is a great time to start working on and continue working on your essays as you continue to work on those. Ideally, you're going to be able to be done with a lot of this process before senior year starts. Senior year grades are incredibly important. So make sure that your student still has the bandwidth to be able to do well in that first semester, because colleges and universities, by and large, will ask for those test scores, rather for those grades to be a part of their application and factor that into their decision. So we want to get as much of this process done before we move into senior year. Ideally, again, we want to make sure that you're starting those supplemental essays also and having them done well in advance of the deadline. Nobody wants to be crying on Halloween before a November 1st deadline. We don't want that for you. That's not something you should be striving for. So even if a student or your student is thinking about applying for regular decision schools and early decision schools, absolutely do not wait until those December decisions come back to then start the December deadline essays. Set yourself up for success. I would much rather you feel like you spend a lot of time perfecting an essay that you never have to submit than scrambling to finish something at the last minute for a regular decision school. We hope that you get into your early decision, early action school, but we'd rather hedge our bets and make sure that you have everything set up just in case the worst case scenario happens or a less than ideal case scenario happens as well.
So I actually want to riff off one of those elements, Jordan, and use it to address some of the myths that come up with college essay writing. Because often we will talk to families who go like, our school counselor told us that there's no pressure to start drafting into the fall of 12th grade. And in that case, what that sets you up for is a really sort of cramped, compressed process. The Common App prompts are already out. They've been out since February, and even before then, the Common App prompts have changed precisely once in the past decade. Waiting until the fall of 12th grade means that you are writing these essays as, that your student is writing these essays as they are also in what's possibly the most rigorous year academically of their high school career. It means that they are tackling all of their supplements for any early decision or early action deadline in approximately 2 months. And not to throw school counselors under the bus here, they're lovely people and they do so much of the heavy lifting of this process. But in many ways, counselors sometimes say this because that is when they want to start working with students on this process. Because the summers, they're often not in the building, they're often not working. It's one of the reasons why we try and start with students in this process as early as we can, because that summer is so critical to start taking care of the various portions of the application and even getting supplements out, even though some schools don't release their supplement essays until August 1st, many have started releasing in June or July so that you can get the vast majority of this work done well before senior year begins. And I know I went a little bit out of order here, but I do want to speak about the other myths. Often for students who are really great writers, they'll go, we think we can tackle this by ourselves, but the most successful essays are often not the most well written. They're the most personal and personally insightful. We've read, beautiful essays. I think we had one a couple of years back that we used as a training piece, actually, that was this beautiful, beautiful piece about the moon. But it told us so little about the student that as an admissions officer, I left, kind of hungry for more, going, I don't know anything about the student besides that they really have an impressive vocabulary. Often we'll have families say that their student is already writing their essay in their English class, so they don't need support. And once again, I feel like I'm throwing an entire school district under the bus here, and I don't mean to, but I was a teacher myself. I taught English at the college level for a couple of years, but that is a very specialized and critical skill set to teach critical thinking, critical reading skills, analysis, writing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are producing an essay that reveals what an admissions officer needs to know about the student. You may be producing an essay that is technically excellent in many other ways, but this is an essay written for a very specific purpose, for a very specific audience. So often, even though the advice of an English teacher may be incredibly well intentioned, it may not necessarily be headed in the right direction. And that kind of brings me to this last bit too, where we'll often have parents tell us that we need to make sure there is sophisticated vocabulary in the essay. And I think this is one of those myths that's also coming from a lot of very good intentions with, with practicalities that don't quite line up. When admissions officers read essays, they know they are reading something that is ideally produced by someone who is 17, 18 years old, who is writing by themselves and in their own voice, because they're looking to get to know the student and who the student is, what makes them tick, what kind of friend, roommate, lab partner they're going to be on a college campus. And when the language of an essay changes, or changes dramatically, or doesn't seem like it was written by a 17-year-old or 18-year-old, it makes it harder for admissions officers to actually get to know that student. And these are people who read, Jordan, how many essays did you read in a season? It has to have been in the thousands, right?
Individual essays, it was definitely in the 2000-ish range.
You can tell when something's been written by, a 40 or 50-year-old parent rather than a 17 or 18-year-old student, right?
Very much so.
So while the student should absolutely write to the best of their ability, and when we work with students, we encourage them and give them resources to do that, the student really does need to write in their own voice. One of the other reasons, and here I'm going to return to this idea of English class, why we would say that it really does help to have external input in this process is the sheer number of essays that a student is going to write and the need to sort of package each essay thinking about the whole process. So for instance, this is a loose example of all of the different types of essays that a student might have to write with the different components that we would keep in mind in the stories we would want to tell. You could see that, for instance, if you're not attentive, you could have a student that's writing about bird watching for their personal statement, for their community statement, for their activity statement, and okay, but 3 out of the possible essays. Now, we have an internship with Parks and Rec that might show up in 2 different essays, making sure that you think through all of the different pieces that an admissions officer is going to see rather than a full essay, rather than simply one essay, can be really important. And to illustrate that, I'm going to highlight 2 sections of the Common App that I think are often the most misunderstood. And honestly, if you take one thing away from this section of the presentation, I think I will speak for admissions officers everywhere by going, a real understanding of what the additional information section is probably one of those. So the Common App provides 2 spaces that are entirely optional. The first is the additional information section that you see on the screen in front of you. The second is going to be the COVID and natural disaster section, which I'll show you on the next slide. These are not places to write additional essays. They are opportunities to clarify elements that may not otherwise show up in the application. This is often things that may look unusual in a student's extracurriculars or transcripts, or even, a standardized test score that an admissions officer should be aware of in order to fairly evaluate a student. That could be something as small as, hey, I'm taking French 5 my senior year instead of AP French because AP French and AP Bio meet in the same class period and I want to be a doctor, so it seems like AP Bio would have been more important. It can be something that small, ranging to, I, broke my tibia in 7 different places when I was a sophomore and missed 6 weeks of school and did very poorly in math because it turns out math is a cumulative subject and it was really hard to understand when you miss 6 weeks of school. I often tell our students, because we have conversations about these sections, is there anything that if an admissions officer was reading this your application in front of you, that you'd want to go, hey, this one thing, can I tell you this one thing? This is a great opportunity to do this. The COVID-19 and natural disaster section is going to be very similar. It's just going to be a little bit more narrow in its focus, where it is specifically about if your student has been affected in ways beyond the norm by COVID-19 or a natural disaster. At this point, I think admissions officers are just expecting that like virtual school kind of was terrible for everyone. And at this point, we are working with students who've had a primarily in-person high school experience. But anything that goes sort of beyond the pale with either of those two things, this is a great place to clarify that so that the admissions officer can understand what's going on. So, Jordan, we've got a ton of these essays that we have to write. How do we even start this process?
It seems like a daunting process at the very beginning, but truly drafting any essay starts the same way in that you start with brainstorming. And especially when you start working with us, that's going to be your first assignment or your student's first assignment. And they answer a simple question, but with infinite possibilities being, what do we need to know about you? This isn't just words, this isn't just adjectives. It can be, and that can always lead down a path. But we're really looking for experiences. We're looking for the stories, the anecdotes, the funny thing that happened in the elevator in ninth grade that one time that can showcase who you are or who your student is and start to draw out those qualities and draw those connections that we can then see among the things that they're writing down. Focus on the things that are important to your student, and we encourage them to do that as well. And we also encourage students to bring in family and friends to this process, this brainstorming process as well. Parents, you remember everything that you've driven your student to at any point in high school. You remember the thing that you asked them to do that 3,000th time rather, and they finally didn't and they loved it. So that's a really great thing to remind them about, because again, everything in their high school experience is fair game to showcase who they are and what's important to them throughout this process. Again, there are really no bad ideas, there are no wrong answers. And those ideas can come from kind of two main ideas or main places, including your resume. So things like activities, jobs and internships, volunteering, the things that you would be important about, or that you would think rather are important. And then things that a lot of students don't think are important, but are actually the more helpful ones. And we'll have some examples of that in a moment. But we call them your toast topics. If someone's writing a toast to you or your student, what would you want them to talk about? Talk about your passions, the hobbies, experiences, the things that were important to you, and the thing that you really want to be remembered by, and the things that have happened to you, that student as well. Not in a negative light, of course, if that is your student's truth, however, absolutely do that. We can have conversations about that. But again, those kind of toast topics are the ones that are most helpful in that process.
Please be nice to 17-year-old me, Jordan.
I will be nice for demonstrative purposes. So again, this is a 17-year-old version of Alyssa's brainstorming that is kind of unhelpful. We have information about the high school transcript that we have here. We have that she plays a violin, lovely. She's second chair, awesome. Editor of the Gavel, older brother, likes to travel, used to have a gold Malibu. That's fun. Maybe there's something there. But I don't really see who she is. I'm not getting a lot of stories or experiences. I don't see a ton of things that are personally insightful or something that would make me say, oh, this is definitely Alyssa, right? If I read an essay or I read this brainstorming, I can be like, oh, I don't know. Maybe somebody else drives a gold Malibu. I know that this other person has a brother as well. I'm not seeing anything personally distinctive here.
All right, so you left comments on my getting to know you, and I revised.
You did, and this truly is showing us a little bit more depth here, right? We're not only talking about your classes as well, but we're also talking about stories behind the fact that you were in the Gavel, right? And you're the only person to show up. What was that like? How did that make you feel? Anything like that rising to the top? Also, we have I also name my cars, and this is something that if again, Alyssa, you were my student, we would be having this conversation. I said my high school car was named Grant, the Grand Dam. It was great. I loved it. And then yours is named Dante. Why is yours named Dante?
So in this case, that car also had leather seats. No, there was no tint on the windows. I didn't have a sun protector or anything, and the parking lot at my high school was in full sun from the very beginning of the day through to the very end. So when you opened that car, it was boiling hot inside. You could not touch the seats. So I was still am a giant nerd, so it was named Dante after Dante's Inferno.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you made connections with your friend when you drove her home every day or drove them home every day. Is there something there too?
Yeah, so we were both in extracurriculars, so I would give her a ride home. She didn't have a car, I did. And what was sort of funny with the Inferno thing is we'd end up standing in the parking lot after everyone else had left with all of the doors open, waiting for the car to cool down enough that I could actually like touch the steering wheel and drive her home. So we had a lot of really good conversations, just kind of standing in the parking lot.
And it seems like, maybe you gave her advice, maybe you were the mom friend, it seems like you were kind of
Nice
that.
connection there.
Listen, this is really a simulation of a conversation that we would have with students where we're asking those introspective questions, asking for details, and trying to dig to get a little bit deeper in some of those details that your students have with you. So hopefully this was illuminating and not too scripted, but at the same time, this is kind of the things that we do when we work with students.
All right. So as we've been talking about how we do brainstorming, you've started to see how we like start speculating and making connections between different ideas. And when we're doing that, we are looking for the things that ultimately make a good essay, that make a good personal statement. And in many ways, we have some of the examples of how our different essay coaches think about that. All of them are like entirely about the student. Our co-founder, Eric Carlin, says, change how I see the world. Show me how you see the world, because seeing how a student sees the world shows us how they're going to engage with and contribute to it. And that's one of the things that I look for as well. I want to see who a student is going to be on campus. I think I literally already said this somewhere on the webinar earlier, but I want to see what kind of friend a student is going to be on campus, what kind of roommate, what kind of lab partner. And when I say lab partner, I don't mean are you going to be really good at biology? Because if you are, great, your transcript's going to tell me that. But are you the person who's going to like stay back and help the TA wash out the petri dishes? Though I guess those are things that you don't wash out because you're growing things in them. I was not good at biology. And Jordan, do you want to say a little about your favorite kinds of essays?
Yeah, my favorite kinds are the ones that answer the question of so what? You went to the place, you did the thing, you had this experience. So what? What was important to you about it? Why is this something that was so meaningful to you that you took the time to write about it? Because that level of introspection is usually where the student lives, right? That idea, that distinction is how we get to know the students better. And I think a lot of students kind of curve towards platitudes, but we're really looking for students and their own opinions and their own perspectives on things. So again, answer the question of so what, why it's important to them is something that I look for in those essays.
Yeah, because in many ways there isn't a set formula, but what we're really looking for and what admissions officers are looking for is authenticity and vulnerability. They really want to meet the student, to connect with the student, because in many ways, like we are all humans. Admissions officers are humans. We are all looking to make connections with others. And I mean, in a sense, the pun on accept here, I think, is intentional in that we are looking for like to make connections and to accept others, both in the sense of like accepting who they are as people, but also hopefully accepting them to our university. And that brings us, of course, to we've talked about what makes a good essay. The corollary to this, of course, is sort of what makes a bad essay. And I want to preface this by saying that often we talk about topics being bad, but in many ways, it's not bad topics, it's going to be bad approaches to topics. Those are often going to be sort of cliched narratives, and this will be the place where we often talk about topics. There are many ways to tell very cliched narratives about sports, about camp, about, a grandparent passing away. But some of these are also, we can fall into the trap of diary entries where it's something that feels very important to the student. It's very personal, they're very vulnerable about it, but we don't see much about the student when they are in some ways relitigating something, painful that happened to them, or topics that are prone to sort of ranting simply because there isn't enough about the student there. We've absolutely had students write deeply heartfelt personal statements about their engagement with religion, their participation in, activism or volunteering on a political campaign. But what is important there is often to connect it to who they are as a person. Do I want to know about what you learned from volunteering from the local mayor's campaign for office? Absolutely. Do I want 5 pages of even really well argued and well reasoned takes on politics? No, because that doesn't tell me about you. So ultimately, there are good essays about all of these topics, about divorce, about, sports, but they need to be distinctly personal and they need to tell us about who you are as a student. We had a student who had climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, which is wildly impressive, but didn't tell us much about him besides the fact that he had an astonishing cardiovascular capacity, which I guess could be helpful on a college campus. I don't know. But he ended up writing about being in a band and what he learned from the people around him and how they sort of pulled together and overcame some of the things, trying to schedule performances during COVID, trying to figure out how to get power to one of their electric guitars when they were playing in the middle of a town square. And it told us so much more about this fabulous human that he was, and it ultimately served him really well in the admissions process. So now that we've talked a little bit about approaching the essays overall, Jordan, do you want to take us through some of the specific essay types?
Yeah, so the personal statement is not going to be the only essay that your student will likely have to write. That might be the case, and that's great. Not every single school will require what's called a supplemental essay or an essay that goes specifically to that school. Whereas the Common Application goes to every school that your student applies to. Again, supplements go specifically to schools that require them. We categorize them into somewhat general topics, including the why college / why your major question, basically asking students why they want to attend that specific school or why they want to study that specific thing. Sometimes I'll ask them together, why do you want to study, what do you want to study here? Either way, that's in the same general category. We then also have topics that are about community and diversity, asking students to either describe a community that they are a part of and how they are a part of it, or describing what sort of things are important to them as far as diversity, what sort of identities do they have, how do you contribute, things like that. There are also then activity essays that ask a student specifically to ask about or to write about rather an activity that's important to them. That is the time to talk about the soccer club, the debate team, whatever else it is, in a way that's a little bit more specific and nuanced to that specific topic. And then there are also some kind of relatively fun essays that are out there. The notorious kind of actor here is the University of Chicago. They reset their supplemental essays every year, and it's actually very fun to see what those topics are. Last year, one of my favorite ones was what advice would a wisdom tooth give? It was great. It was funny. It was fun to work on. And they're really fun for students to kind of think about in a new and nuanced way.
Vermont's got a great one about what ice cream flavor you would be since they're so close to the Ben and Jerry's factory.
If you love puns, that's a great one to work on too. So it's very fun. Diving into them a little bit more, again, the common application is the personal statement, same name, kind of using both of those names. It's 650 words, and again, goes directly to every school that you apply to. Our number one piece of advice is to fully ignore the prompts. Yes, they are there for students to think about, but they are really our guidelines. And prompt number 7 is your friend. That prompt says, submit an essay on the topic of your choice. And that's typically what students end up applying under as they work with us. Because ultimately, as long as you're showcasing who you are, it's really better to put that authentic voice in there as opposed to kind of shoehorning an essay into one of those 6 or 7 different prompts.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about personal statement. For the next few slides, we want to talk about why college essays. These are probably the most common type of supplement essay that a student will write. And I have 2 examples here. One is from the University of Michigan, which you can tell from the prompt. The other is actually from the University of Pennsylvania. And you can see both of these prompts ask students to articulate not just what they are interested in studying, but also how they would explore that at a given university. And we're going to talk a little bit about that first half first. What do you want to study and how do you articulate that? In general, the way you're going to do that is through this Venn diagram of sort of past and future, where a student is likely interested in, a given major or a given academic concentration because of past experiences. So tying in those past experiences, whether it was a fabulous project in AP Bio or an internship at a business, or even something personal, like a visit to a historic site that sparked an interest in history, a personal experience that sparked an interest in medicine, meaningful class moments, let us see you learn, and then future goals as well. Now that a student has had those past experiences, those meaningful moments in class, how do they dream themselves forward and see themselves in 5 years, 10 years? How would they use the degree that they would get at that specific university? That being said, we understand that, the vast majority of people applying to college are 17 or 18 years old. It is okay to be undecided. Even the students who apply with a specific major, I believe the statistic is like 70% of students end up changing their major over time. It is okay to be undecided. You can write an interesting and compelling why major essay as undecided, but you have to show that you are interested and interesting. The goal for an undecided essay is to show that a student's undecidedness comes from a multitude of interests. I don't want to commit to French or history or business because I want to be able to study all of those things. I am so hungry, I can't decide what to order off of the menu, rather than I don't have any idea. I'm not hungry. And it's also important to understand that a why college essay is not a contract. We often work with students who really want to be honest and they go, but I don't know if I'm going to take that class or take that opportunity. These are exercises in imagination and speculation. It is fine to go, I think I would want to take that 300 level business course on fashion management because that's how I see myself combining the French and the business component. But you don't have to take it. No one from the admissions office is going to show up with your essay in your junior year and go, hey, why aren't you enrolled in that fashion management class? Get out. It is a way of showing engagement. It is a way of thinking specifically, but you can change your mind at any time. And one of the ways we help students, undecided or not, start to think through how they might articulate these sorts of interests in their Why College essays is we ask for mission statements. And this is actually one of the brainstorming activities that we have students do, where we ask them to think through problems and questions that they are interested in. And these can be great for undecided students because it allows them to focus on their intellectual curiosities first, rather than trying to draw on a major, and then unpacking what they've done with those intellectual curiosities and whether or not they may connect to a career. Because ultimately, at the end, once we have everything we need to know about the student, when we get to writing the actual Why College essay, we're looking for a Venn diagram where the student brings in all of the things that they have already done, all of the things that they are, intellectual curiosities, skill sets, what they need or want from a school, and show how it overlaps with what the college offers, whether that's programs of study, course offerings, that can even be campus culture or history and values, until we settle in that Venn diagram that is the essay itself. We've talked about how we get that sort of orangey half. The blue half comes through research. Visiting a school is great. You don't have to visit a school, but often that's going to be research. That can be going onto the school's websites. Google if you're having trouble. College websites are incredibly poorly designed. I don't know who did that. They should all be fired. But often if you're looking for, interesting things in a biology field, you will have more luck Googling University of Vermont biology department than going to the University of Vermont's website and trying to navigate it. Same with finding course catalogs. Just search University X course catalog. But there are other sources beyond just the college website. You can look at YouTube videos. You can, talk to friends or family who have connections to the college to see what their experiences are. You can, and you should be taking notes when you visit a school of the interactions you have and what stands out to you. Admissions officers are great resources. They all got into this field because they like talking to students. You can email professors and ask questions. We all got into this field because we liked working with students. There are many ways to get the kind of specifics that allow you to, dream yourself forward into who you would be on this school's campus. And then I'm just briefly going to give you a couple of examples of those other college essays, especially the past two in this case, the sort of community and identity essays. They have become more and more prevalent over the past couple of years. We work with students all the time on those, but these are some of the other essay types that you might encounter over, the next 11 odd months of this process for, those of you who are juniors, and for those of you who are sophomores, things to be thinking about idly. You don't need to start worrying about this yet, but things to think about as you are moving forward in this process. So specifically, especially for juniors, we are actively, meeting with clients. I think we are 2/3 of our way to our cap for the year when it comes to, juniors, rising seniors that we'll work with. And Jordan, do you want to talk a little bit about how we do work with students?
Yeah, so after hearing about all these essays, it might seem like there's this huge mountain of work in front of you. And sometimes yes, sometimes no. But either way, we coach students from the very beginning of this process, including the brainstorming, through drafting, through polishing, and having those conversations about college counseling as well, all the way through to when you set down your deposit. You can text us, you can email us and say, hey, I put down the deposit, I bought the t-shirt, I'm going here. And even still, we'll probably reach out in November-ish to make sure that you're still having a good time on your college campus. We really want to emphasize the fact that we're here for you every step of the way, and we're doing the coaching, which means we're not doing the writing. Students, as we have tried to articulate here, need to be able to communicate their authenticity and vulnerability themselves. I don't know the details of the things that the students are writing about, so it's up to them to really put it in their own words and their own voices. And as Alyssa alluded to earlier, admission officers are really good at picking up on the nuances of a 17-year-old writing versus a 30-something plus, however old, their level of writing as well. So again, students are really the backbone of this process and needs to be in their voice and their work as well. And we'll keep students on deadline and on track as well. We'll make sure that we're setting deadlines, we're communicating with them. If something comes up, if they're confused, if they don't know what's going on, if they don't understand a comment we made, for example, that's something that we can absolutely help with. And we just want to be in constant communication with them as well. Again, we're helping them on every step of the way through their applications, including working with them on the activities section of the Common Application, as well as the optional additional information and COVID sections, as we talked about earlier. And we also have a kind of another level of support for students, understanding that this is a big process and that a lot of things and a lot of emotions are probably going to come up, especially around decision time. We truly care about our students. We are as excited for you and as bummed for you when you get news back. So we just want to be here for you and emphasize the fact that we not only help you strategize about whether and where you should apply early action, early decision, giving you the resources and telling you to go Google the thing as opposed to looking it up on the website to find out the information for you to make the decision about early decision or early action. But again, we're also here to, be a sounding board. If you want to rant and rave and be upset about a certain school, we can be here for you for that as well. And ultimately, we keep you organized as well. It's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of kind of fluid motion. If your student is not used to email, they will be after this process because we emphasize that we'll be working with students via email. And we'll also give them a drive. We'll give them a Google Drive. They'll have all sorts of resources within them. This is a sample of the Google Drive that your student will get. And they have a lot of resources within them. Everything from about activity sections to primers to help you think about the activity section as well, and also how to work with the common application, or rather with the additional information section. This is all really great information that's free for students to use as soon as you start working with us. There's also then the worksheets that you'll start working with as well, that will be where you actually start to draft those activity sections. Additionally, there's a lot of research resources here too to get you started about building a college list, thinking about whether you want to apply early action or early decisions somewhere, financial aid primers. We can really give you that research and give them the places to get started with a lot of those as well. And we have a lot of information also about things that are kind of outside of the kind of typical admission world as well. Things like brag sheets, things like self-reporting your grades for the schools that ask you to do that. And what to do after you submit, right? Keep on top of your email. If you listen to nothing else about this section, keep checking your email, students, right? Because all of these things are really important to you. And it seems like a lot, and it seems like it's a lot to keep organized. But again, if you decide to work with us, these are just a fraction of the things that we'll be able to help you with on your journey again over the next 11 something months between now and when you start to make your decisions about where you're going to go to school.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. if you would like to talk with Jordan or myself, we'll be putting our initial consultation links in the chat momentarily, but I do see we already have a couple of questions coming in. So let's go ahead and get to that. So, Jordan, I'm gonna go ahead and throw this first one to you. If my daughter is going to be a softball captain her senior year, but softball is a spring sport, where might a family include that information on the application?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's unfortunate timing, of course, but that's something that you can put in either the activity section and say anticipated captain. The activity section gives you 150 characters to give a description as to what your participation is or your student's participation is in that activity. So you can say anticipated caption, elections in spring, or you can put it in the additional information section as well. You can put the activity in the activity section, and then in the additional info section, say, I'm not going to know whether I'm a captain until March of 2025, which is terrifying to say. But I will keep you updated and update my application as things progress. And then this is a really appropriate time if your student then becomes the softball team captain to email the admission officer or to email the admission office with an update saying, hey, my position has changed. This is new. Can you please add this to my application?
And that's also something that we coach students on. If they are deferred or waitlisted, we'll help them with letters of continued interest to, make sure that any significant updates like that do get addressed over the course of, writing those letters so that the admissions officers are as up to date as possible. All right. I also had one that came in. Do essays matter more if you are going to be applying test optional? In a word, yes. At the very beginning of this webinar, we opened with those same 5 factors that many of our sort of repeat webinar listeners have heard before. Those 5 factors, of course, being grades and rigor, standardized test scores, extracurriculars, letters of recommendation, and essays and applications. Once you take away one of those 5 factors, it means ultimately that admissions officers are making decisions based on those remaining 4, and those remaining 4 have to carry have to carry more weight in that instance. I'd say often it's going to be the grades and rigor that get looked at more heavily, as both of those are sort of academic components, but the essays are going to have to step up as well. All right. Jordan, I have another sort of activity section question for you. So if a student's going to participate in something essentially the summer before their freshman year of high school, or they are a rising freshman, is it something that you would mention on the application in this case?
That might be something that's worth putting in the additional information section. We always encourage students to think about the top 10 things, because you only have 10 slots on the activity section in the common application. The top 10 things that are the most important to them. If that happens to be in the top 10, that's awesome. One of the other strategic things that we do is that we help students think about the order of the application, or the activity sections rather. Deciding what's 4 versus 5 is not really where we're looking at here. Deciding what's like top half versus bottom half is what we're thinking about there. So that happens to be in the bottom half of their activities. You never know, but not necessarily waxing poetic about it, since it hasn't necessarily happened to the student yet.
All right, we also had, and Jordan, I'll let you address this one as well as a former admissions officer. So different essays and pages upon pages of them.
Yeah, I'm really looking to see things that are not already on the application elsewhere. Again, of the 5 factors in your control, we're going to see that the student is a great test taker from their standardized test, that they're great. So we're looking for something outside of that. Again, we've said this multiple times here, but it really is true. In the cafeteria, we're really trying to see if you're going to be a great part of our community, or being the amorphous I used to be admission officer. So this is me that coming out right now. But ultimately, again, admission officers are just looking to see what kind of student they are, they being your student is. They're not looking for any specific magic word or phrase that's like, ah, this is a mission, right? But really looking for whoever the student is. And that authenticity will go a long way than trying to write something that, students think that they need to write because it's college and it's important and I have to sound like this.
This next one, I'll start off by answering, but I'm sure you'll want to jump in as well. We had someone say, all my kid does is sports. It's the only thing they care about, but we've been told over and over that it is cliche to talk about sports. Any tips? So sports is actually one of those things that we often say, that many people say is a bad topic, and it's become shorthand for there is a very tired, very cliche narrative that many students go to when they are writing about sports. And it is generally one of 2 different varieties. It's going to be the I was on the team and then I tore my, I don't know, sports tendon, and then I wasn't on the team, or I was on the bench and I realized that I could still make a contribution when I was on the bench and it felt good to support my team. Go team. Or there's the, I was on the team and we tried really hard and I learned about resilience and grit and we won the big game and it felt great to win because of our resilience and our grit. Or we lost the big game and I realized that what was really important was the resilience and grit that I'd learned along the way. Please do not write that essay. But what you do there, and this is what we do with students in our brainstorming process, is you dig into that topic and you find the distinct perspective that only your student could have. Is it, I don't know what sport your student plays, but is it, for instance, learning how to, learning how to throw a particular kind of pitch in baseball and realizing that just the tiniest adjustment of your fingers and making sure your fingers land on the 6th stitch and not the 7th of the ball can add up to such a big difference over time. And then that becomes an essay about the importance of small details adding up to a big change. Is it about, playing hockey and realizing that you need to trust your teammates when you're practicing a blind pass and you just have to pass the puck to where you think your teammate should be and trust them to be where you need them to be in that moment. And then it becomes an essay about trusting others, but also making sure that you are a person that others can trust. And you spiral out from there. It's those small details. Jordan, did you want to add anything there?
You hit the nail on the head. I think you're more than welcome to write about a common topic, but you can't write about it commonly. And if you have 17 sports essays in front of you, what will make your students be distinctly about your student, right? And not necessarily about the sport or about the things that anybody else could write.
All right. And we also had a question about, can you make an appointment for a face-to-face meeting with an admissions officer when you have a school tour? That's going to vary school to school. I would reach out to the admissions office. Most schools will at least do an information session that will be led by an admissions officer, so you'll have a chance to potentially get questions answered there. And yes, we will be sharing this recording. We'll be posting it on YouTube as well as emailing it out to everyone who signed up for the webinar. Please feel free to share the recording with, students, share it with a parent who wasn't able to attend, parents share it with a student who wasn't able to attend. And we'll also be including our consultation links in that email as well. Thank you to everyone for joining us on what at least is in our states a fairly beautiful Sunday afternoon to chat a little bit about essays. Obviously, Jordan and I are essay coaches. It's our favorite thing to talk about. We hope this was helpful and enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.